Okay. We are in Ephesians chapter 6 this morning. Ephesians 6. And we're picking up, again, these chapter breaks are added by humans much later. Paul didn't write that way. But last week we ended chapter 5 talking about Paul's comparison between the church and Jesus, the relationship between Christ and the church, and the relationship between a husband and a wife. And he tries to, at the end, verse 32, say, I'm talking about the church. And then verse 33, well, I'm also talking about husband and wife. Kind of goes back and forth. And the fact that he is, I hope this is still working. I got another software warning coming up. Anyway, this makes me so mad. I don't know why you can't just have a computer and it does what you tell it to anymore. It's like they've got the right to tell you everything. Well, you don't need to hear what I'm thinking in my head right now, Nell, that's for sure. Because right now, I'd like to. There's a man, not a young man, but a man I'd like to say something that Ralph Cramden used to say to Alice. Do you want to go to the moon? You can't even joke about that anymore, but nor should you probably. But it's very frustrating. Anyway, um, this, Paul's dialogue kind of comparison goes back and forth, blurring the line between the discussion of Christ and the church and husband and wife. And then, again, like I said, he tries to close it by saying, I'm talking about the church, but I'm also talking about husbands and wives. And he certainly is, because chapter 6 picks up with a couple of more very important social relationships that exist in every culture, some form or fashion. And he's using these, I think, as another way of looking at how it is to walk, what the Christian walk is to look like. And in a sense, the commandments are very simple, it appears. And then when you start trying to apply it, it can get very complicated indeed. And this is, to everyone who says the Bible is simple, first of all, say, no, it isn't. Secondly, I would say the simplicity of Scripture, a lot of times matched up against the reality of human life, creates a lot of complication. And we'll look at that a little bit today. So, Ephesians chapter 6, verses 1 through 4. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, so that it may be well with you, and that you may live long on the earth. Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. Okay. Anybody have any thoughts on that? Let's start with the. Looks like I wanted to ask some questions today. Let's start with the first commandment, the first aspect of children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. What are there any problems to that you can see arising, or maybe that you have experienced on either side of that equation? Okay. Well, that's in keeping kind of with this overall theme that Paul's in right now. This Christian walk is supposed to be a model to help have decent and orderly societies. And just as being faithful and respectful in marriage, to other marriages as well as your own, to treating your marriage, your partner, your spouse appropriately. all of those things are fundamental to having a solid society. Maybe that's why there haven't been very many solid societies in the world in history. And when they are come about, they don't last very long. But that's part of what's going on. It's not just Paul telling you right from wrong. It is the impact of that life. It is a counterculture, perhaps, to a lot of dominant cultures, but it is one Christians model, and hopefully it will have an impact beyond even just their own family. Yes, yes, sir.
Well, just kind of what you said, but it's like this is from the very beginning in the family, and children obey their parents. This is the beginning of, at a very early age, children learning to look to look to an authority, to something higher than themselves for guidance.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is the family. The family is very important. And having a family like this and having this kind of structure in the family is something that teaches children from the very beginning that there is there is an authority higher than them, there is a power higher than them, and there are rules to be followed, or there is an example to be followed.
An example, a structure, and certainly when you look at the Old Testament, Psalm 62 is not a particularly good example that we had today, but there are other psalms and other wisdom literature that are designed to say, okay, we've got a pretty good situation going on right here. Here's how you keep it going. And those scriptures speak well when everything kind of makes sense in life. And when nothing makes sense, they don't really seem to speak very well. It's like they're missing the point, because that's not what they're trying to address. They're not trying to fix a broken society. They are trying to maintain a functioning society. And I don't know what you think of our society right now, if you think it's functioning or if you think it's broken. But this part of the order, part of like um, people obeying or living in a way that's decent and helpful in all aspects of their lives, including their sex lives, people honoring and respecting their marriage and other people's marriages, help a society function, children being obedient to their parents is also something that can help a society function properly. And when you see children that do not obey their parents, there's something really broken there. And if that's normal, if that's what gets normalized, you have a very problematic society. You have things falling apart. I remember the first time I ever saw one of my friends from church just backtalk his mom. And I thought he was going to get knocked to the moon. I thought he was going to go to the moon. And nothing happened. Now, in that family, there was a lot going on. They had dealt with a lot of tragedy, and the child is acting out on some of that. The child had had an unfair hand in life dealt to him. And I think the mother was being patient. She's a wonderful Christian lady. I think she was being patient. She knew her child was grieving at that time. And people don't always say and do the right things anyway, and they certainly don't do it when they're in intense grief. But the basic order of things is that children obey their parents. That, though, is presuming the parents are doing the right things by the children, too, though, isn't it? And there's a lot of uh, kids out there that are raised, not so much maybe in America, maybe here too, I don't know, but they're raised to pick the pockets of tourists in certain corners of the world. You go visit, and this is all over Europe. You go visit, they know they can spot you, us American tourists, a mile away, and they know we brought money for the trip. So the family, mom will walk up carrying a baby, and a 3-year-old will be in there picking your pocket. They'll create some kind of distraction. Maybe the baby will start screaming, and everybody looks around, and that's a common practice in certain parts of the world. Is the child supposed to obey their parent when they are taught to do that? Or do you stand up to mom when you're 3 years old and say, I'm not stealing that guy's wallet? It's pretty tough, isn't it? I mean, these commandments in both of these things that we're going to look at today seem to be simple, but they're kind of based on a presumption of good things on both sides, particularly good things on the side of the person in power. That the person in power is not exploiting. Our psalm talked about rejoicing in oppression or whatever that was. Do not, hang your hat on the oppression you bring on to the others. Well, this is the part of the thought. If that parent is not asking the child to obey, and maybe it's older than 3, at what point? And at what point is a child perhaps relieved of the obligation of obeying them? What if you're 40 and your dad's 75? Do you still have to obey your dad? It's kind of not usually put that way, but it could be, couldn't it?
I think somebody brought up earlier respect, and the phrase we put around a lot is respect your elders, and there's probably a way to, and once both parties are adults and have their own lives, like you're talking about, there'd be some way to show respect, but disagree or not do something that would be against your principle.
Well, again, that's a good point. As you having your own life, and that is something that in our culture we try to raise. When we do raise our children appropriately, we're trying to help them become self-sufficient, so that at some age, and by the time they're teenagers, the sooner the better, they can move out and be on their own and take care of themselves. Right? In other cultures, including biblical cultures, you moving out and being on your own isn't in the picture.
Something was wrong.
Yes.
You were cast out.
I mean,
as opposed to you just growing up and leaving because you wanted.
You can see how Isaac got his wife Rebecca. Did he get online at ChristianSingles.com? Did he, did he go meet her at church somewhere or something? No. His dad's slave, which we will get to in a little bit, Abraham's slave, went and found her. And this whole idea of, you get married, a man cleaves to his wife, leaves his father and mother. That sounds like that's the biblical way to do things, and it's very early in the Bible. It's not even part of the law of Moses. It's Genesis chapter 2. But is that what happened? The kids the adult kids are always around. Look at how much grief Jacob's kids gave him. So all these one of the big complexities is when is this adulthood? When is this I don't have to obey my father anymore?
And I guess something that we've either acknowledged or been made more aware of is something that we read and think about in America because of what was our society and culture does not cookie cutter into other countries and cultures, and especially in Bible.
Well, I think The text is for everyone, but our interpretation, our understanding of what this means. Well, once you get out on your own, you can do whatever you want. No, maybe not. Maybe when your 70-year-old dad asks you to pick up your 68-year-old mother at the hospital, he's not really asking, he's telling you, and maybe you ought to do it. Now, kind of getting more, again, besides trying to all culturally, Paul is linking obedience to honoring, that these are things that wouldn't necessarily or always happen at the same time. They're not automatically coincidental, that when you honor your parent, you obey them. You might revere your parent. You might honor your parent in a lot of ways. That's not obedient. You may obey them, but not really honor them. I mean, when Noah ties one on after the ark comes back to the ground, one son sees him laying in the tent naked and humiliates him, right? Mocks him. The other two sons discreetly cover their father's nakedness. They honor him. They're not obeying him, but they're honoring him. So these two things aren't exactly one follows the other. Certainly not all forms of honoring equal obedience. There's ways of honoring your parent that are not an act of obedience. To the parent, anyway.
The other thing that we haven't touched on yet is that this is the first commandment with a promise. That's interesting, and then it follows with what the promise is, that it may go well with you and that you may enjoy a long life on the earth.
Well, in the Ten Commandments, where this commandment first comes, it's not just about living a long time on the earth. It's that your society will dwell long in the land of Canaan, to which I am leading you. If you want a strong, enduring nation, and a nation has land and it has people, if you want to stay in that land and you want to have a strong nation, you will have an honoring relationship between parent and child. And we kind of hinted at this. The commandment of children to obey parents is balanced by what? Fathers, do not exasperate your children. Again, in our context, we might automatically, I think we need to start serving coffee on Thursday mornings. Maybe I'll start doing that, especially in the winter. But especially in the context of kind of modern take, the way parents work. I mean, my parents were a team very much. My dad was gone a lot. He worked, mom stayed home. But every time mom told us to do anything, it wasn't mom just going out on a limb telling us to do something. We couldn't say, well, it says fathers, not mothers. It also says it doesn't say mothers don't exasperate. Can mothers exasperate their children? Are they allowed to? But in ancient cultures and in a lot of civilizations today, a lot of cultures today, the father and the mother have very different roles. And the mother is almost not even an authority figure. The mother is primarily a caregiver. You may see children from another, if you haven't seen this yet, it's coming, I promise you. Y'all think when I tell you this stuff, it's what I like. I'm telling you, it's coming, it's out there. It's not what I like necessarily. But you can see families sometimes at McDonald's or a mall or something like that from a different background than ours. I'm not going to name names. There will be a bunch of kids and maybe a handful of women there. No men. And those kids are running amok. And the mothers aren't even trying. Why? It's not their duty. It's not their place. Especially their little boys. They are not really, in that culture, an authority figure. So to say fathers do not exasperate your children can we automatically say, well, that means parents? And I'm no Greek expert. I looked this up online in Greek. It's pateros. It is fathers.
It's funny, the commentator here says fathers must surrender any right they may feel they have to act unreasonably towards their children.
Well, reasonable is a very subjective standard, isn't it? I mean, it is, and it does it. I mean, I think most of us would just go ahead and say, parents, do not exasperate your children. But that's our culture. And is it just your biological father? And that really gets home now, doesn't it? What about stepfathers? If you don't include mothers normally in this translation, you just say fathers. What about a mother who's having to be a father because dad's dead or dad hit the road? What if your dad, when you're a little boy, before he leaves, he names you Sue? What do you do then?
It may not be the original intent, but that's the principle required.
Okay. It's certainly not the intent because the intent is not to have another man raising somebody else's son. Happens. It was certainly happened back in biblical times. We've looked at the special provision for a widow whose husband dies with that, and they don't have a baby. His brothers, if they live near the near kinsman. The whole story of Ruth, that first child belongs to the decedent, to the person, to the man who died, even though biologically there's no relationship. So the actual biological father is now raising, he's in the position of a stepfather, raising the child of another man. You can watch all kinds of videos, read all kinds of studies about how bad kids can have it when they are raised in a home with a man that's not their biological father. Sometimes it's a wonderful thing. Some stepfathers are absolute heroes. I mean, you can see those videos as well when a 16, 17-year-old kid walks up to uh, his kind of stepfather or her stepfather and asks that stepfather, "Will you adopt me?" I mean, those are tear jerkers. But statistically and generally over the big thing, it's terrible. You know, what it does to a kid to be raised by a man that's not their father. And it's not the kid's fault. It may not even be the stepdad's fault. It just doesn't go well most of the time. Where does this fit in? Does it fit in these extended families? We talked about they've had all these nuclear families. It's one thing to have your father tell you what to do. What about your uncle? What about an older cousin? What about your grandpa? And you think, well, that's just kind of case by case. That's how families work and all that. Under Roman law, the oldest male member of the household, whatever that means, however that was defined, the oldest male member of the household was the pater familias, the father of the family, and what he said went, period. And he might not have ever even been married and had kids. What if that's your dad's old gay uncle that's now the father of the family? It's tough, doesn't it, some of these things? There's no father to begin with.
Um, don't we see, before we go too far away from it, in verse 3, Paul doing as they have, this is not a direct quote, and I'm having trouble we'll get to the various versions that I could. And so anyway, this does not appear to be a direct quote from Exodus and Deuteronomy. So is this Paul tailoring this, like you said, when it was told to the Israelites, they were to stay in, to honor their parents, so they could
stay in Israel,
right,
stay in the land of Canaan.
right. And this is changed a little bit so that it may go well with you and you may enjoy a long life
A long earthly life. That's a big change, isn't it? That's kind of more your personal experience versus our society, our nation, our people enduring well. There's a lot of truth in that, though. I mean, I really think people who have a lot of anger and hostility toward their parents have a very hard way in life. I mean, if you cannot be around your parents and be civil and be decent to one another, that's tough. I don't know if we have that here in this group or not. Hope not. But it is, and sometimes it doesn't mean necessarily one side's bad and the other side's good. Sometimes they just, personality-wise, or they could have gone through a really hard time together. A lot of times couples will get divorced after their kid dies because just the trauma of losing their child damages their perception of their spouse. Maybe your kid had his father's eyes, and every time you see your husband, you see your kid, and you're taken right back to that place of losing him again. And I'm not saying they should get divorced, but I am saying, when you have trauma introduced into a relationship, sometimes it doesn't ever heal, or it heals improperly.
Well, and then going to like what I understood Ray to say that in verse 4, modern day circumstances would necessarily be parents rather than just fathers. Whereas you're saying that, educators without remembering where they're talking about. Nowadays, because we were talking about single parent families, it would apply to both. Because there is no father there, so it's the mother, so she's got it's going to be harder for a single parent not to exasperate your children as they exasperate you.
But a single parent, maybe your husband dies, you're a mother, and your husband dies when you have two kids, let's say, instead of before you have any kids. But you have his brothers and sisters around. You have his family around to help the child's grandparents and all. But it's all on his side.
Well, yeah.
Does fathers include fathers-in-law? And if it does it just include the woman's father-in-law? Does Sherry have to listen to my dad, but I don't have to listen to her dad? Because especially in the ancient times, when the daughter married, she married into the son's family. The woman married into the man's family, and they paid the bride price, the dowry, whatever it was, and then she was cut off. Basically, they didn't want to see her anymore. She's a mouth to feed. And if she comes home with a bunch of kids, that's a bunch of mouths to feed.
And I don't think that's the expectation nor the desire for the most part in the culture that we're in now, that the other male relatives jump in and start telling this lady how to run their life. Now, she may ask for help, but we've seen that cause trouble where the other male relatives,
and not just biological relatives, but church brothers and sisters. There's a widow or a divorcee in the church. Some men will get their necktie all polished up and say, I got to go tell this woman what to do. And and other things can flow from that it can be very problematic. I know of some horror stories in that regard. So it's really, this is a great general rule for a well-ordered society, and it's something that we should aspire to. I think if it's not well-ordered, if we don't, this is kind of how it ought to work. And I think it does speak to everybody in every culture, but in a different way. And instead of saying and looking at other people's situations and say they should do it this way, we should be respectful of their own context. Family is very complicated, especially for a lot of people. For, some of us were very fortunate. Our parents were together the whole time. We were raised by mom and dad, but we also had this very American experience. At least in my case, I didn't have aunts and uncles around very often. Only when we went to visit them. Only when we drove a day and a half to go basically go visit. I mean, we didn't see them very often, so they didn't shape our lives. I didn't have to worry about my uncles were going to tell me to do. And yet Abraham and Lot, it was kind of like father and son a little bit between Abraham and Lot. Abraham goes to Lot's rescue when he's kidnapped, but they couldn't live together either, could they? They had to go their separate ways. And yet they loved each other. So these things are all these relationships are all very complicated. And this is one that most of us are lucky to keep it pretty simple. But instead of trying to tell everybody else what this means, be thankful for whatever simplicity you have in this situation, but also be patient, tolerant, understanding that this is not the relationship everybody has with their parents. Not everybody gets to be raised by both parents in the home. Not everybody has Christian parents. Not everybody even has parents who love them. So instead of judging them, throwing this verse at them when they're having a hard time, I mean, we have a family group, not naming any names, and Robert, please don't name any names, but where a child was not obedient, and there doesn't appear to be anything anybody can do about it. It's just the way it is. Nobody, I don't think, on either side of the relationship has done anything to make it that way. It's just the way it is, and it's heartbreaking. And hopefully, as a group, we don't judge them. We love them, all of them, and pray for them. That's really all we can do. So this is simple, but not easy. Children, obey your parents. Fathers, don't exasperate your children. How can you be a father and not exasperate your child, though? At least a little bit, especially the boys. I mean, isn't that the whole point of the song, A Boy Named Sue? I mean, they love each other, don't they? At the end of the song, they love each other. But a father is going to treat you differently than your mother's going to treat you. Always. Your father's going to try to turn you into a man. Your mom may try to keep you to be a little boy. So it's difficult. I mean, these are the kind of relationships. How you relate to your parents, that's going to dictate a lot of your adult life. Absolutely.
And again, as we find so often in the Bible, if there's a question, there's an answer. If there's a command, we often find there's a reason for doing what it says for you to do. As I said earlier about 2 and 3, verse 4 says, don't exasperate your children, but instead bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. So
but what if you don't do either one? What if you don't exasperate them, but you don't really do anything?
Well,
What's a child?
Right,
yeah, what's a child supposed to do? That's the thing. This is an unavoidable relationship, isn't it? If you're a human being, you have parents. You have a father and a mother, and I know how controversial that is these days, and all of that. You may not experience that. That may not be your experience, but biologically, you have a father and a mother, and they're not going to treat you exactly the same. There's differences between being a father and being a mother. And is Paul talking about here parents, or is he talking about fathers? In his culture, he's probably talking about fathers. Because it was real easy for a father in this culture to just check out. Maybe be married to the mother, but the women and the children stayed away from the men. And sometimes that was good. That was the best you could hope for. It's not what we aspire to, and it's not what we hope for. It's not the models we've had put in front of us in our culture. But when we deal with people from other cultures, and if you haven't done it yet, you will, kind of maybe make some allowances, I guess. Okay, we'll leave there and pick up. That's a lot of talking about 4 verses, I know, but we'll pick up the next section next week, and I'll have another handout for you, hopefully. Thank you for your attention and comments. And I didn't